The moment my mother called me worthless, 17 members of my family were standing behind her, waiting to see whether I would cry. I was holding the maple bourbon pecan pie she had asked me to bring to Thanksgiving. She blocked the doorway of her Charleston home, looked at the pie, then looked at me and said, "Worthless people do not belong at this table." My younger sister, Lauren, raised her champagne glass from inside the foyer and laughed. Someone clapped. Then another person joined in. Through the open door, I saw a presentation glowing on the dining room television, my name crossed out beneath the words Cedar Haven's next chapter. My former best friend was sitting in my chair. My father stood beside the fireplace and refused to meet my eyes. That was when I understood the dinner had never been an invitation. It was a stage, and my family had brought me there to play the unstable, jealous daughter they needed everyone to remember. I placed the pie on the porch, nodded once, and walked back to my car without giving them the scene they had rehearsed. Before I reached the end of the driveway, I made one phone call. 20 minutes later, the laughter inside that house turned into screaming. My name is Hannah Reed. I was 35 years old that Thanksgiving, and for most of my life I believed that being useful was the closest thing I would ever get to being loved by my mother. My family lived outside Charleston, South Carolina, where the Reed name carried more weight than it deserved. My mother, Margaret Reed, had founded Cedar Haven Recovery after Hurricane Matthew damaged hundreds of homes along the coast. What began as volunteers carrying drywall and bottled water grew into a respected nonprofit that repaired storm-damaged houses, managed state recovery grants, and collected millions from private donors. Local television stations called Margaret, the woman who rebuilt the Lowcountry, and wealthy donors praised her at elaborate fundraisers. Inside our home, however, my mother repeated a colder rule. A Reed was either useful or embarrassing. My sister Lauren learned early how to remain useful in the ways Margaret admired. Lauren was 4 years younger than I was, beautiful, effortless in photographs, and capable of making a room feel exciting even when she had nothing important to say. She studied marketing, married a real estate developer named Blake Sutton, and became Cedar Haven's Director of Donor Partnerships. Lauren gave speeches about dignity, while assistants carried her bags. She called displaced homeowners impact stories and tracked donations by which photographs performed best online. Margaret adored her because Lauren turned our family into a brand. My father, Edward Reed, managed public relations for Cedar Haven. He wrote speeches, coached Margaret before interviews, and repeated that protecting the mission sometimes required swallowing personal discomfort. He had been swallowing discomfort since my childhood. Whenever Margaret humiliated me, he said she was under pressure. Whenever Lauren took credit for my work, he said public-facing people needed simple stories. Whenever I asked him to correct a lie, he told me not to make the family choose sides. Silence, in my father's language, always sounded noble. In practice, it protected the loudest person in the room. I chose the least glamorous path available inside Cedar Haven. I became Director of Grant Accountability, which meant proving that restricted recovery money reached the homeowners named in every award. I reviewed invoices, inspected project files, reconciled contractor payments, and spoke with people who had spent months living in motels or damaged homes, while our website displayed smiling before and after photographs. My mother said I worried too much. Lauren called me the Department of No, yet the work mattered. I caught duplicate invoices, repaired broken files, and stopped contractors from billing homeowners for work already covered by grants. Prevention rarely photographs well. The person I trusted most at Cedar Haven was Melissa Grant, our Human Resources Director. Melissa and I had shared lunches for 7 years. She knew which family meetings left me shaking and which remarks I pretended not to hear. She attended my 32nd birthday when Margaret forgot, because Lauren was hosting a donor cruise. She once told me I deserved a life where my mother did not evaluate my worth by how useful I was to the organization. I believed her. That belief would become one of the most humiliating parts of everything that followed. The first file that changed my life belonged to a 72-year-old widow named June Cooper. June lived in a small blue bungalow on John's Island. A tropical storm had damaged her roof, flooded 2 rooms, and left mold behind the kitchen cabinets. Cedar Haven's records showed that the roof had been replaced, the mold removed, the wiring inspected, and temporary housing provided. The file carried photographs, contractor approvals, and a completion certificate bearing my electronic signature. June was still sleeping in her living room beneath a section of ceiling covered by a blue tarp. Her grandson sent me photographs after 6 months of unanswered calls. I drove to the house myself. Rain had stained the walls, half the outlets no longer worked, and June apologized for the mess as though our failure were hers. "They keep telling me the project is complete," she said. "Maybe I misunderstood what complete means." I returned to the office and traced the payments. Almost $67,000 assigned to June's repairs had moved into a general operating account. 3 contractors listed in her file had never visited the property. 1 invoice belonged to a different house entirely. The temporary housing payment had been used as part of the deposit on a waterfront event space Cedar Haven planned to purchase for donor gatherings. At first, I assumed an accounting error. Then I reviewed 10 similar files. The same pattern appeared again and again. Restricted homeowner funds had covered payroll shortages, office renovations, promotional videos, and deposits for an expansion into Georgia. Some work had been completed partially. Other work existed only in photographs reused from different projects. The numbers were not random. They had been moved deliberately by people who understood exactly which accounts were least likely to be questioned. I brought the findings to Margaret and Lauren during a Monday morning meeting. Margaret did not read beyond the first page. She pushed the folder back and said, "This is what happens when compliance people forget the difference between paperwork and leadership." Lauren leaned against the conference table and explained that disaster recovery required flexible cash management. Money moved temporarily, so projects could continue. I told her restricted grants were not a family checking account. Her smile disappeared. "Do you want 70 employees to lose their jobs because you cannot understand timing?" she asked. "I want June Cooper's roof repaired with the money approved for June Cooper's roof." Margaret lowered her voice. She became most dangerous when she sounded maternal. "Hannah, loyalty means bringing problems with solutions, not accusations. The solution is returning the money and correcting the records. That would create panic. The records are false." My father, who had been silent near the window, finally spoke. "Take a few days off. You are too close to this." Lauren said the expansion would generate enough revenue to replace every temporary transfer. I reminded her nonprofit grants were not investment capital. Margaret closed the folder. "Enough. You see theft because you have always resented the people capable of making larger decisions." I looked at my mother and realized she had not misunderstood the evidence. She had decided the rules applied only to people without her name. Over the next month, my access changed. Financial reports vanished from my dashboard. Lauren began attending compliance meetings and answering questions directed to me. Draft reports appeared under my name, with language I had never written. Melissa started asking exactly which records I kept at home and whether I had downloaded homeowner information. Our general counsel, Daniel Cross, reminded me that mishandling confidential documents could destroy my career. The warning came before anyone had accused me of mishandling anything. Then I found my electronic approval on a reimbursement report filed while I was presenting at a conference in Denver. The login occurred at 2:14 p.m. Eastern Time, exactly when 200 people were watching me speak in a hotel ballroom. Someone had used my credentials to certify more than $800,000 in completed repairs. The report included June's bungalow. That was the moment I stopped asking whether Cedar Haven was hiding misconduct from me. Someone was preparing a history in which the misconduct belonged to me. I preserved only records I was authorized to access and created a dated timeline. Then I contacted Samuel Price, the independent chair of Cedar Haven's audit committee. Samuel was a retired banking executive with a slow voice and the unsettling habit of remaining silent until people filled the space with truth. I showed him the transfers, duplicated photographs, and unauthorized approvals. He asked whether I believed my family would correct the problem voluntarily. I thought about Margaret pushing June's file back across the table. No, I said. Then stop treating this like a family disagreement, he replied. Protect the homeowners, protect the organization, and protect yourself in that order. I submitted a formal internal report through the board's protected channel. Within 3 hours, Margaret held a closed meeting with Lauren, Edward, Melissa, and Daniel. Melissa called it a leadership retention discussion and avoided my eyes afterward. 2 days later, complaints appeared in my personnel file. Junior employees supposedly found me intimidating. I had allegedly missed deadlines, shared private information, and allowed jealousy toward Lauren to influence my decisions. None of those concerns had existed the week before. Melissa had signed every summary. When I confronted her, she closed her office door and said, "People have been afraid to speak honestly around you." Which people? I cannot disclose that. Because they do not exist? Her face tightened. Do not make this harder than it needs to be. I felt something inside me break, not loudly, but completely. Melissa had listened to me describe my family's cruelty for years. Now she was helping them turn that cruelty into official documentation. At Cedar Haven's annual harbor luncheon, Margaret introduced Lauren as the bold future of regional recovery. She praised Edward for protecting public confidence and thanked Daniel for guiding responsible growth. Then she gestured toward me and said, "Hannah keeps us cautious. Every family needs someone willing to worry while the rest of us build." The room laughed. Cameras caught me smiling because I had been trained since childhood to protect my mother from the consequences of her own words. That afternoon, a regional engineering cooperative offered me independent consulting work, reviewing disaster recovery grants for small counties. The role would let me help communities without answering to my family. I did not accept immediately. Leaving Cedar Haven felt like abandoning the homeowners whose files I had promised to protect. Margaret learned about the offer anyway. She summoned me to her office, accused me of planning to sell family systems to competitors, and placed a promotion letter on the desk. Vice President of Risk Strategy. A larger salary. An office overlooking the harbor. One condition. I would withdraw the audit complaint and sign a statement describing the questioned transfers as temporary administrative adjustments. "You are offering me a promotion for changing the truth," I said. "I am offering you a chance to grow up." Lauren said I had always preferred rules because leadership required courage I did not possess. Edward asked me to consider what a scandal would do to the Reed name. Daniel warned that resignation would not protect me if confidential records appeared outside the organization. I looked at 4 people who had known me most of my life and understood that not one of them was asking whether innocent families had been cheated. They were asking whether I would remain useful. I resigned the next morning. I rented a narrow office above a marine supply store and opened Hannah Reed Recovery Review with 1 desk, 1 folding table, and a window facing an alley. Margaret told relatives I had been dismissed for emotional instability. Lauren told donors I had tried to take proprietary systems. Edward described my departure as a painful family matter. Melissa stopped answering my personal messages. Only a field coordinator named Claire Moreno remained in contact. She sent updates about unfinished homes and warned me that Lauren was finalizing a large expansion loan secured partly by expected reimbursements from restricted projects. If the money moved, dozens of families would lose funding permanently. I sent Samuel an organized evidence package through the board portal. It included the unauthorized approvals, altered photographs, grant transfers, personnel retaliation, and the continued use of my credentials. He asked whether I wanted him to activate emergency review. I said not yet. Even then, I hoped the board could return the funds, remove a few people, and preserve Cedar Haven without public collapse. I still believed protecting the organization might protect something good my family had once built. 1 week before Thanksgiving, Margaret called. Her voice sounded soft and tired. She said work disagreements should not destroy blood relationships, and asked me to come to dinner at 3. I wanted to believe her. That was my weakness. Not stupidity, Not ignorance, but hope stretched far beyond the evidence. I bought pecans, bourbon, and maple syrup. I found my grandmother's handwritten recipe card and baked the pie she used to make before Cedar Haven existed, before every family gathering became a donor photograph. On Thanksgiving morning, Claire sent me a picture from Margaret's dining room. My place card stood beside Lauren's. Next to it lay a printed announcement naming Melissa the new director of grant accountability. Behind the cards, the television displayed a title slide. Cedar Haven's Next, Chapter Leadership, Legacy, Trust. I assumed they planned to humiliate me with a ceremonial replacement. I did not understand that my place card was bait. They needed me angry, inside the house, surrounded by relatives, donors, and board-connected guests. They wanted witnesses who could later say I arrived unstable and threatened the family. By the time I reached Margaret's waterfront home, my place card was gone. Melissa was sitting in my chair. Lauren had a champagne glass in her hand. Margaret opened the door and called me worthless. Then the clapping started. I saw my father near the fireplace. His face was gray, but he did nothing. I saw Daniel beside a donor, watching closely. They were measuring my reaction, so I gave them nothing. I placed the pie on the porch, walked back to my car, and called Samuel. "Activate emergency review," I said. He paused. "Once I begin, executive access will be suspended, the bank will freeze the expansion draw, and the independent board will take temporary control. Your family cannot quietly reverse it." I looked through the windshield at Margaret's house, every window glowing against the November dusk. "I understand." "Are you certain?" "They just told me I do not belong. Let us see whether the records agree." 20 minutes later, my phone began vibrating so quickly, the screen appeared frozen. Margaret called 6 times. Lauren sent messages in capital letters demanding to know what I had done. Edward wrote that I had ruined Thanksgiving in front of important supporters. Melissa claimed the dinner was a misunderstanding. Daniel left a voicemail instructing me not to delete documents, as though I were the person who needed the warning. Inside the house, the presentation stopped. Remote access to Cedar Haven's financial system disappeared. The bank suspended the expansion transfer. The audit committee issued preservation instructions. Project managers were ordered not to destroy files, contact homeowners about testimony, or remove computers. The laughter was over because the people at the table had just discovered that my silence had been the only thing standing between them and accountability. I drove to my office instead of going home. Samuel had already asked an outside review team to meet me there. The lead investigator was a woman named Priya Shah, a former state grant administrator who carried a canvas bag, 2 laptops, and the kind of calm that made panic look childish. She did not ask whether I wanted revenge. She asked which families were currently unsafe. We began with June Cooper, then listed 38 other properties marked complete despite open roofs, exposed wiring, missing bathrooms, or families still living elsewhere. The records told a story more brutal than anything my mother had said at the door. Cedar Haven had not simply borrowed from one account and planned to return the money. Leadership had begun measuring which homeowners were least likely to complain publicly. Elderly people living alone, families who spoke limited English, residents with disabilities, people ashamed that they could not repair houses without help. Their silence had been treated as available funding. At 9:30 that night, headlights filled the alley below my office. Margaret arrived first, followed by Lauren, Edward, Melissa, Daniel, and Blake. They came upstairs without waiting to be invited. Priya remained beside the filing cabinet while Samuel joined by video from my laptop. My mother stopped in the doorway when she saw them. Her first expression was not guilt. It was irritation that I had witnesses of my own. "This has gone far enough," she said. "You embarrassed us in front of donors, froze payroll, and endangered every active project because your feelings were hurt at Thanksgiving." "Payroll is protected under temporary board control," Samuel replied from the screen. "Active projects are continuing." Margaret ignored him. She looked at me. "Call this off." "No." "Hannah, you are angry." "I was angry 8 months ago. Tonight I am finished." Lauren stepped forward with the smooth voice she used on donors. She said the transfers were temporary and the expansion would have generated enough revenue to replace the restricted money. Then why were homes marked complete? I asked. Administrative pressure. Why were the same photographs attached to different addresses? Field mistakes. Why is my signature on reports I never reviewed? Melissa began crying. Lauren answered for her. Your account stayed active during the transition. Staff used existing workflows. Staff signed my name. Nobody intended to harm you. Priya slid a printed system log onto the folding table. The intent will be easier to discuss after we determine who used the account. Daniel warned that the review could expose the organization to donor lawsuits and government penalties. That exposure already exists, Samuel said. Hannah's report did not create it. Edward moved toward me. He looked older than he had that afternoon, his shoulders curved beneath a coat he had forgotten to remove. Can we speak as a family? You watched Mom block the door. I did not know she would say that. You knew the presentation would call me unstable. His eyes dropped. I knew they planned to announce Melissa's appointment. Did you know they wanted witnesses to my reaction? He did not answer. Margaret snapped that the dinner was supposed to make relatives understand how destructive I had become. You resigned, stole records, attacked your sister, and then expected to walk into my home like nothing happened. I reported false grant files. You betrayed a mission larger than yourself. June Cooper is sleeping under a tarp while you purchased an event property. That building would have increased donations. With her roof money, Blake finally spoke. He said large organizations sometimes used bridge financing and insisted I lacked the sophistication to understand growth. He suggested I accept a financial settlement, sign a non-disparagement agreement, and let Cedar Haven repair the records privately. How much is my silence worth? I asked. He answered without hesitation. $2 million, possibly more. The speed of the number told me they had prepared it before arriving. Margaret said I could return as chief operating officer after the review ended. Lauren said we could describe everything as a misunderstanding caused by weak accounting systems. Edward promised a public family reconciliation. Melissa whispered that she could remove the complaints from my personnel file. They were offering to return the things they had taken: my reputation, my job, my place in the family, as though restoring stolen property were generosity. No, I said. Margaret stared at me. What do you want? June's roof repaired. Every homeowner account restored. My name removed from approvals I did not make. The board told the truth. And then? Then I leave. My mother laughed once. A hard sound without humor. You think you can walk away and still call yourself a Reed? I walked away when you told me I was worthless. I was trying to make you understand the damage you caused. You were trying to make me perform the version of myself you had already written. Melissa stepped closer. Hannah, please. I made mistakes because Lauren promised the department would be protected. I thought you would take the promotion. I thought everyone would calm down. You created complaints saying I frightened employees. I was told to document concerns. You sat in my chair while they clapped. Her face collapsed. Margaret said it would prove you had moved on. No. It proved you were willing to help erase me for a title. She reached for my hand. I stepped back. That movement hurt her more than shouting would have. Margaret's composure finally broke. She called me ungrateful, bitter, and jealous of Lauren. She said Cedar Haven existed because she had sacrificed everything while I hid behind spreadsheets. She said the family would tell every donor, employer, and reporter that I had sabotaged the organization after being passed over for leadership. Then she said, "If you continue, you are no longer my daughter." I looked at the woman who had spent 35 years teaching me that daughter was a position I could lose through disobedience. You cannot fire me from being your child, I said, but you can lose the privilege of knowing the woman I became. Margaret lunged toward the table where Priya had placed the system logs. Blake caught her arm before she reached them. Samuel ordered everyone to leave. Daniel remained long enough to ask whether the board had found any attempted transfers after the holiday. Samuel's silence answered him. Daniel went pale and walked out without looking at Margaret. 10 minutes later, Priya showed me what the bank had stopped. $4,800,000 had been scheduled to leave restricted homeowner accounts and enter a newly formed property company controlled by Blake and Lauren. The authorization carried Margaret's approval and my electronic signature. The request had been submitted at 3:07 that afternoon. At 3:07, I had been standing on Margaret's porch holding a pie while 17 people watched her call me worthless. Doorbell footage showed my arrival and departure. My phone placed the call to Samuel minutes later. Their attempt to create witnesses against me had accidentally created proof that I could not have approved the transfer. Priya stared at the timestamp. "They built your alibi while trying to destroy your credibility," she said. I felt no triumph. I thought of my father standing beside the fireplace, knowing enough to remain silent. Before sunrise, the board had disabled every executive credential, secured office computers, and appointed temporary managers. Cedar Haven did not close. Staff continued answering homeowner calls. Contractors working on legitimate repairs were paid. What ended was my family's ability to control the records and call that control leadership. The following week brought a social media war I refused to join. Margaret posted that her deepest betrayal came from the child she had sacrificed most to raise. Lauren called me a disgruntled former employee, and relatives urged me to protect the family. Not one of them asked about June's roof. I responded once, with no emotion and no accusation. The independent board is reviewing restricted homeowner funds and unauthorized records. Active repair work is continuing. I will not discuss private family matters online. Then I turned off comments. The records spoke without needing my performance. Staff members began coming forward. Claire provided altered inspection calendars and messages, directing coordinators to photograph finished rooms from angles that hid damaged sections. A contractor admitted Lauren had instructed him to submit invoices before work began because Cedar Haven needed reimbursement quickly. An accounting assistant produced an email from Margaret saying homeowner accounts could carry the institution until the event venue opened. Melissa surrendered messages showing that personnel complaints had been created after my internal report. One message from Lauren read, "We need Hannah emotional and isolated. Thanksgiving gives us witnesses and a clean family narrative." Another from Margaret said, "Take her chair before she arrives. She needs to see that Cedar Haven has moved on." I read those words alone in my apartment and finally cried. Not because they surprised me, but because cruelty planned in writing feels different from cruelty explained later as emotion. They had discussed my face, my chair, my reaction, and the exact moment relatives should laugh. My mother had turned family into a focus group for destroying me. The board removed Margaret and Lauren from leadership. Edward resigned after donors learned he had repeated completion numbers he knew were false. Daniel left before the board could dismiss him. Melissa was terminated for falsifying personnel records and allowing my credentials to remain active. Blake's property company lost the expansion deal when the bank withdrew. The waterfront event space went back on the market. Cedar Haven's temporary managers canceled the Georgia expansion, sold unused assets, and redirected every available dollar toward incomplete homes. The organization was renamed Low Country Home Recovery because the board decided no family name should stand above the people receiving help. Margaret called the renaming an attempt to erase her legacy. I thought about June's tarp and understood that a legacy built by erasing other people deserves a smaller name. My parents sold the waterfront house the following spring. Legal expenses, repayment obligations, and the loss of Cedar Haven income made the lifestyle impossible. I did not celebrate. Losing the house did not return the family I wished we had been. It only proved that image becomes expensive when truth stops subsidizing it. Lauren's marriage to Blake deteriorated after their business plan collapsed. She blamed him for pushing the expansion. He blamed her for failing to control Margaret and me. They separated within a year. Consequences were not trophies. Watching Lauren's lifelong protection vanish was sad, even when it was necessary. Edward asked to meet me alone 6 months after Thanksgiving. We chose a coffee shop where neither of us could control the room. He looked thinner and carried no public relations language for the first time in my memory. "I should have opened the door," he said. "You were already inside." He closed his eyes. "I should have crossed the room." "Yes. I thought keeping Margaret calm protected everyone." "It protected you." He nodded. "Yes." The honesty was late, but clean. He said he had known the records were being managed aggressively, but convinced himself Lauren would replace the funds after expansion. He knew the Thanksgiving presentation was designed to make me look unstable but did not understand the attempted transfer. "Would it have mattered?" I asked. He stared into his coffee. "I want to say yes. But I had spent so long choosing silence that I am not sure what would have finally made me speak." He asked whether we could rebuild. I told him I did not know. "I can forgive a frightened man," I said. "I cannot pretend fear made you harmless. We speak occasionally now." He does not carry messages from Margaret. The moment he does, the relationship ends. Melissa mailed me 6 letters. The first letters explained pressure and blamed Lauren. By the 6th, she finally wrote, "I knew the complaints were false. I signed them because I wanted your position, and I believed your family would sacrifice you before they sacrificed the organization. I decided survival mattered more than friendship." That was the first honest apology. I did not answer. Understanding why someone betrayed you does not require making yourself available for another attempt. Margaret never apologized without a condition. Her first letter said mothers sometimes made impossible choices to protect what they built. Her second said Lauren had become reckless. Her third accused Edward of weakness and Melissa of disloyalty. Each letter ended by asking me to retract statements, soften my account, or publicly acknowledge Cedar Haven's good work. She wanted forgiveness as a new public relations strategy. I returned the letters unopened after the third. Then I sent one written boundary. No direct calls, visits, gifts, or messages through relatives. Necessary communication could pass through the board's counsel. She told family I was punishing her with silence. She was wrong. Silence had been the weapon she trained me to use against myself. My boundary was not silence. It was an answer she disliked. Low Country Home Recovery repaired June Cooper's roof first. I visited after the final inspection. Her kitchen walls were painted pale yellow. The damaged cabinets had been replaced, the wiring corrected, and the blue tarp folded inside a trash bin. June made coffee and apologized that the pie she served came from a grocery store. I laughed and told her homemade pie had become complicated for me. She did not ask for details. Before I left, she touched my hand and said, "People who depend on your silence will call your voice betrayal." I wrote that sentence inside the cover of my notebook. My consulting firm grew slowly. I reviewed recovery programs for counties, churches, and small nonprofits that lacked full compliance teams. I also started a homeowner support project that helped families read grant files and challenge false completion reports. The work was quieter than Cedar Haven's galas and far more useful. The next Thanksgiving, I did not enter another grand waterfront house. I spent the morning helping distribute repair status packets at a community center. That evening, Samuel and his husband hosted a small dinner. Priya came, along with Claire, June and her grandson, several former Cedar Haven employees, and 2 families whose repairs had finally begun. I brought the same maple bourbon pecan pie. When I placed it on the table, no one asked who had earned the first slice. Nobody clapped at another person's humiliation. Nobody used the word family to create a debt. We ate from mismatched plates while children played beneath folding chairs. It was the least impressive Thanksgiving photograph I had ever seen and the first one I wanted to keep. Claire took a picture after asking everyone's permission. I stood in the middle because there was space, not because anyone arranged me there. For years, I believed the worst thing my mother could do was call me worthless in front of everyone I loved. I was wrong. The worst thing was that part of me had believed her long before she said it. I had spent my childhood earning access through usefulness, my career protecting a family institution that refused to protect me, and my adulthood confusing endurance with loyalty. Walking away from the porch did not make me valuable. It proved I was finally willing to behave as though I already was. I did not win because Margaret lost her title, Lauren lost the expansion, Melissa lost my friendship, or Edward lost the comfort of silence. I won because I stopped asking people invested in my obedience to provide an accurate measurement of my worth. I won because June slept beneath a finished roof, because families received the funds assigned to them, and because my name was no longer available for anyone else's lie. Cutting off toxic family does not always feel powerful. Sometimes it feels like grieving people who are still alive. Sometimes you remember the sister who held your hand during storms, the father who taught you to ride a bicycle, and the mother who once stayed awake beside you through a fever. Good memories make boundaries harder, not less necessary. A person does not have to be cruel every day to become unsafe in the moments that matter. Love can remain after access ends. Compassion can exist without another invitation. Forgiveness can release anger without reopening the door. My mother said worthless people did not belong at her table. She was right about one thing. I did not belong there. I belonged wherever truth did not require permission, where help reached the people named on the file, and where my place at dinner did not depend on what I could protect, hide, or provide. So tell me honestly, if your mother, father, sister, and closest friend had staged a Thanksgiving humiliation to frame you for their wrongdoing, would you ever allow them back into your life after a sincere apology? Or would protecting your peace mean closing that family door permanently?